Hello and welcome to another Missing Link webinar. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Jane. I'm the co-founder of JBH, the digital PR agency, and I kind of host the Missing Link webinar series. Today I'm joined by Rebecca Moss, who's our digital PR director. And actually it's really fitting because it's her 2-year anniversary at JBH, and she's been really instrumental in helping us get where we are today. So as I say, the timing is a coincidence. This seems to be like a good date in December for this, but I think it's really fitting that she's here, and she's going to be discussing how to harness newsjacking for digital PR. So I know she's got a lot of insight, a lot of examples to share, and also a lot of tips too. So I think this is going to be really useful, very insightful. She's probably going to be giving away all of our secrets, but it will be useful, it'll be great. And so we'll do like half an hour, and then at the end we'll do kind of 15 minutes for questions. So please, if you do have any questions, just pop them in the little kind of Q&A comments or open questions below, and then we'll go through those at the end. So I'm going to hand over to Rebecca just to tell you a little bit more about her role at JBH, what she does, and then we'll kind of start talking about newsjacking.
Thanks very much, Jane. So hi guys, welcome to the Missing Link webinar. I'm Rebecca and I am Digital PR Director at JBH. So I look after 15 people on my team, and we work on a range of different accounts ranging from personal finance brands, home and interiors brands, lifestyle brands, a whole range of different things, which is why kind of newsjacking is something that I'm super passionate about, especially considering the year that we've had over the past 9 or 10 months, I guess now. So newsjacking really has been instrumental in the way that we've been able to achieve coverage and links for our clients, and I hope today that I can kind of give you some insight into the type of things that we've been doing, and kind of some tips and tricks on just how to set yourself up to newsjack your digital PR campaigns that are already running.
Perfect. Okay, so let's kick off by talking about kind of what constitutes digital PR. Not digital PR. We all know what constitutes that. What constitutes newsjacking? And I know there is a definition for this, but then at JBH we tend to break it down into smaller bits too. So we'll start off by talking about like a definition of newsjacking, and then we'll talk about maybe its application.
Absolutely, yeah. So newsjacking is quite a traditional PR term, I suppose. So it was coined by David Meerman Scott in his book, actually called Newsjacking. So his definition was effectively the process of adding your thoughts or your clients' thoughts and opinions into breaking news stories. And there's a nice little graph that you can see being posted around quite a lot that shows you when you should be kind of pitching your ideas and thoughts to journalists in kind of the timeline of a story. Effectively, it's piggybacking on trends and news topics to get yourself in the press, or your clients in the press. So that's kind of like the definition of newsjacking, I guess, in a traditional sense. Whereas the way we like to look at it at JBH is we break it down into kind of 3 different types of things. So we have kind of a reactive approach, so effectively like traditional newsjacking, reacting to a story with a comment, or reacting to a story with an idea or a thought or something from our client. The proactive side of things, so actually positioning a story that's related to something that's happening in the media, or relating to something that's kind of top of mind at the moment, and kind of positioning that story to journalists. And also
Proactive.
We talked about proactive. So yeah, then the proactive stuff would be crafting a story that's adjacent to the news agenda, and then the newsjacking side of things, so applying your client to that story where you need to be ready within like 30 minutes to an hour. So there's a few different types of ways of doing it, but what I really like to do here at JBH is not worry too much about having comments ready, or kind of worrying about having comments like in a like already ready written. Is actually taking the campaigns that you're writing, that you're already pitching and outreaching, and applying newsjacking techniques to that. So you're basically already set up to do newsjacking. It's just having the idea and connecting the idea that's in the press with the campaign that you're already running. So squeezing the most out of those campaigns that you've spent time and effort putting together.
Yeah, and what I like about this is it's not starting from scratch. It doesn't have to be additional. It can just be part of what you're doing already. And it might be that, if a campaign isn't quite going to plan, or it's not performing as well as you want it to, or you've hit a bit of a quiet patch, then newsjacking is a great way of kind of finding stories to bring it back in and to do something with it again?
Absolutely. And I think as well, if you can live and breathe the verticals that you want to newsjack, for example, say you're really, really into interiors, or if you're really, really into food and you have a client that's in those verticals, you've already really, really well placed and really well set up to be able to do that, because you'll already, without even noticing it, you'll already be kind of absorbing those stories because you have a vested interest in that. And I think that's super, super important and something that we've noticed here at JBH. So we've tried to put people on accounts that we know that they enjoy and we know that they are kind of have an affinity with. And I think that's really, really helped by kind of positioning the people within our team to do that.
Yeah, I definitely think there's value in having a pre-interest in a topic, because you're much more likely to kind of put that time in to, do that research, or to be listening to kind of extra things and really kind of taking in all that information.
Exactly. And equally, we've talked about the team and how they best fit into the newsjacking technique. But I do think there's kind of a call for having that really, really nice relationship with your client, because even though you're not going to be asking them for quotes, doing the kind of newsjacking that we do, having them understand why you're wanting to do newsjacking and understand the process behind it. So having that relationship is really, really useful as well. And we found that newsjacking works best when we do have that kind of relationship with nimble and responsive clients as well. It's when you start getting into like layers of stakeholder approval when you kind of lose that reactiveness of it. So yeah, I think kind of one tip from me would be to try and get that relationship with your client, that if you are an agency side, even if you're kind of in-house, having that relationship with the person that needs to sign those things off or needs to give approval is super, super important as well.
Yeah, and on that note, also it can be knowing what topics you can and can't cover, so you don't waste your time thinking you can react to a story that actually, the brand you're working on, doesn't want to touch for kind of obvious reasons and things. So it's good to have all those discussions up front to know what your remit is and things you should stay away from too.
100%. I think in terms of newsjacking across the board, I don't think it should feel forced. I don't know what you think, Jane, but I think if it feels like you're kind of shoehorn your account or your campaign into something the way it shouldn't sit, it's not going to work. I think it should feel natural. So you should easily be able to think of that idea and easily be able to think of how you would fit your campaign or your client or whatever you're doing into that news story, because it needs to be a seamless segue. And I think if you don't have that, it can just feel a bit awkward. And I think journalists can sense that as well if it doesn't quite fit.
Yeah, I think it could smell of kind of desperation to journalists if you kind of force a comment or something into something where your brand really doesn't fit and you don't really have any overlap. So definitely. So where do you think people, can or should be looking for newsjacking stories? Like, do you have some go-tos?
Oh, there's so many different places. And what's quite interesting about the places that I would recommend getting newsjacking inspiration from is that you don't physically have to do anything. You don't physically have to go out looking for stories. You can get those stories delivered right into like your eyeballs and your ear holes, I guess, just by having a few things set up in place. And even just as simple as if you've got an Alexa or like a HomePod or a Google thing in your house, you can literally set it up, and every time you get up in the morning or you're pottering around making a coffee or just getting ready in the morning, just ask Alexa to read you the headlines, and she'll literally give you the top line of everything that's going on in that day. And I just think it can be quite difficult to remember, when you're busy, it can be quite difficult to remember to go and look at all these different news sources, and there's so many that you need to have, you need to be aware of. But just having that initial kind of in the morning, getting those headlines read to you, it can literally spark an idea straight away related to something that you're already working on. So when you think of newsjacking, you're not having to go and like rifle through the papers every day. You could literally have those ideas like funneled straight into you. It's quite passive actually, as long as you have those things set up. And even things like podcasts. If you love listening to podcasts, not necessarily like the the true crime podcasts, I guess, or I suppose it depends what client you're working on. But I think there's kind of the Financial Times, they have a great one, the great daily news briefing, and equally there's a really great one called The Week Unwrapped. I don't know if you guys have ever listened to that one. It's by a publication called The Week, and they look at news that's kind of flown under the radar. So you could actually get some really interesting ideas out of that without having to look at kind of headline-based news, I guess.
Definitely. And I love what you said about kind of Alexa and just listening to the headlines, because if something jumps out at you from the headlines, then you can ask for more information on that story.
I'll tell you what's a really good one as well, the Spotify Drive Time playlist. So
Okay.
that if you've got a Spotify account, it will already have that playlist set up for you, and you can tweak it a little bit depending on what you want to have in there. So mine has like the Times daily briefing in there, and it has the Financial Times, has the Economist one in there, because obviously I'm working on quite a few personal finance brands at the minute. So having that in there, I know I'm obviously not driving to work as much at the moment, but just having that on in the background, and it's got music in it as well. So it's like your own personalised radio station. So definitely check that one out if you've got a Spotify account.
Yeah, no, that's such a great suggestion. And if you're as old as I am, and most of you aren't, but I do listen to Radio 4 in the morning, but I listen to it because it gives you the headlines, but it also gives you kind of a lot more insight into the topic. So it goes into a lot more detail. And
Great one.
what that does spark is some ideas that you wouldn't get from just reading the headlines. So there might be some nuances in that story that you pick up, from programs that go into more detail that you can then kind of take into work. And I often go into work, bombard you with, ideas I've had based on what I've heard.
Tell me about it.
But it really lends itself to that. So I think, headlines are great, but get that further information, really find out kind of exactly what's going on within that story and what those like little data points are and kind of nuances of the story.
Just off the back of what you said there, Jane, about kind of coming in and bombarding us with ideas, that's what I want. That's the kind of mindset I want with people in my team, and I'm trying to foster that within them all. So, if you do spot something in the press, tell somebody about it. Have a think about how you can relate one of your campaigns or one of your clients to it. If you've thought enough to kind of tell someone about that idea, there must be an idea in there somewhere. So yeah, that's kind of interesting that you say that, like bombarding. It's not really bombarding. It's helpful.
Good. It feels like I'm pestering you, but on that note, can you give us an example of, you having heard a story and then you've kind of jumped on it because you thought, wow, I can either use a current campaign for this, or this could spark something new?
There's a couple of examples actually, but I'll just tell you the one that was kind of more traditional newsjacking, I guess. It was a ministerial mansions campaign that we did for a property online estate agent brand called eMove. So what we did with that campaign is that we valued the price of ministerial mansions around the world using their internal home valuations team. And we basically had a lovely campaign that was telling us that what the price of Buckingham Palace was effectively. That was the top line, that Buckingham Palace was worth 4.9 billion. So as we were doing that campaign, it got like a decent amount of links. It did really well. But I just thought I wanted some more out of it. I wanted some more like top tier coverage out of it. So I set up a few Google alerts around like Buckingham Palace renovations, and the royal family finances. And as luck would have it, at the end of September, the royal family released their like annual financial statement for the year, and it didn't look great, to be honest. So what I did was I had a look at that campaign and thought, how can I spin this? How can I spin the fact that Buckingham Palace is worth 4.9 billion and make it so that it's going to solve the woes of the royal family that haven't, struggling for money effectively. So what we did was I spoke to the client and said, look, can we put Buckingham Palace up for sale, as if it was like a bit of a spoof page on their on their online platform. And effectively that went live really quickly. Nice kind of funny little description about the palace and what it had, and kind of as if someone was going to buy it, as if it was like a Rightmove listing. And then we kind of pitched that with a hook to the royal family finances. The royal family have put Buckingham Palace up for sale because of their poor finances this year due to coronavirus, etc. So we had all those different kind of topics within there, and that did really well. That kind of went on the Express, and then it kind of rolled on from there. So that was a good example of seeing something in the press, and that literally came from a Google News alert.
Yeah.
And that we already had set up around Buckingham Palace. So, I didn't actually have to go out looking for that story. I'm not big into the royal family anyway, so it wouldn't be something I would know. But the only way I would have known that was by that Google alert coming through. So,
yeah. So that having those alerts was key to that kind of campaign performance, as it did in the end.
It wouldn't have happened if I'd not known that, because it wouldn't be something that I would be actively looking for. But because I had that passive information coming through to me, I had the idea. So it's so important to make sure that all your tools are set up correctly when you're outreaching anything. And equally with that campaign, I've still got those Google alerts set up now. So if I see another story coming out in the press about their finances, or about the renovation of Buckingham Palace, we might be able to outreach it again. So that campaign then becomes evergreen, without having to actually have an outreach strategy in place all the time.
Great, okay. And let's talk about kind of speed. So newsjacking, and I think I've shared this little kind of graph recently, which like shows the nice kind of curve of a news story and how quick you need to be when you're newsjacking that. So in your opinion, how quick do you think you need to be with a response, whether you're sending out, a campaign, a comment, whatever it might be? How quick do we need to be?
I think you need to be within the hour, even quicker than that. And what's great about the way that we do things, personally, I think, is that we don't need to speak to the client or get an additional comment signed off. We're already outreaching that campaign, we're already pitching it. So we already have approval over everything that's in it. It's just how we formulate our pitch with the hook around that reactive piece. So effectively, if we see a story breaking the news and we've got have an idea of how we can apply one of our campaigns to it, we can have that out within half an hour if we get that pitch written up quickly, even quicker than that if we're super quick. But yeah, I think time is of the essence, and that goes across all aspects of newsjacking. I think it's super, super important. And journalists will thank you for it as well.
Yeah, and also it's not just to kind of be in with the journalists, but it's also to make sure, that other brands don't kind of beat it, I guess, similar stories. And given the nature of digital PR these days, and that there's so many brands, so many agencies that are doing it so well, it's so competitive. And even when you're not doing something that's kind of a newsjack story, like I noticed something today go live from another agency, and we were going to do something very similar, but they'd done it really well. They've covered everything we were going to cover, and that was more of a hero campaign that wasn't kind of that timely. So it just shows that everyone's thinking about the same things, the same topics, everyone's got similar ideas, so speed is everything.
Absolutely. I think you have to be campaigns are moving so quickly at the minute. One day you'll have an idea and the next day you'll see another brand doing it and you'll kick yourself for not being quicker. So again, if you can newsjack something or you can do something on a reactive/proactive basis, then do it. Don't think about it. Don't, wring your hands about it and worry about it. Get it out there, see what happens. As long as you're not kind of upsetting anybody or doing anything that's going to kind of put your client in an awkward position, then, as long as you've got that great relationship with the client, they'll trust you to do it.
Definitely. Okay. So when you're kind of pitching kind of newsjacking stories or data or comments, do you have like a set way of doing that? Do you have some do's and don'ts?
In terms of do's and don'ts, I think, like I said before, if you have an idea, just do it. Don't think too much about it. As long as you're not going to upset anybody, then that's fine. I think also just be mindful of other stories around the campaign that you're pitching. I think that goes without saying for everything. Like, for example, there was something this week where we were going to use Meghan Markle in one of our campaigns, and obviously with the current story about her in the press earlier this week, we pulled that one because we just thought it was in really bad taste. So just be mindful of other things that are happening, and just make sure that you're happy to go out with whatever it is you're planning to do.
Cool. Okay. So there's no kind of, apart from, just being kind of careful that you're not going to upset anyone, there's no specific ways or styles of kind of pitches that you need to kind of think about.
I just make them as short and snappy as possible. You don't need to have a great big press release. In terms of the people that you'll be pitching to, I'd just have a look at who's been writing about that topic. If you've seen a Google alert come through for a certain story or a certain news story that's come out, have a look at kind of who wrote that. It seems simple, but make sure you're pitching to them first. Even if they've already written the story, there could be another angle that they're planning later on in the week that could fit your campaign in there. So it kind of it breaks every single rule of digital PR, but it's worked for us in the past.
So what other benefits do you think newsjacking has, other than, we talked about kind of maybe picking up campaigns and rescuing them a little bit with newsjacking, but are there any other kind of strategic benefits that you see?
100%. So say, for example, you want to drive links into category pages or drive links into kind of other areas of the site that might not be within your larger campaigns. So say, for example, you've been getting a load of homepage links, but you want to get some kind of more powerful links into kind of sub and category pages, then that's a great time to do that. So it depends on what kind of brand it is or what client or kind of what industry you're in, but that's another great way of being able to do that. We've had some really good success with getting like deeper links into pages using this newsjacking technique, where we haven't been able to kind of cut through with that with the hero campaign.
Okay, that's interesting. And I think I personally have noticed that since we've kind of been doing the mix of newsjacking with the hero campaigns, but also doing kind of more proactive pitching, like link building has become more consistent rather than having those, ups and downs and kind of gaps where kind of links don't come in. For most of the brands we're working with, we're seeing them kind of nicely, not float in, that's not the right word, but the links are kind of dribbling in, for want of a better word. So it does feel kind of more consistent and a bit more natural in that respect.
Yeah, I think if you're working on like hero campaigns, you might have a period where you're doing the planning or the research or the data, whatever it is that you do to build your hero campaigns. Something and then your campaign might not be an outreach, so you might have like an ebb and flow of links. Whereas if you like cover that with reactive and kind of proactive pitching alongside, you've always got that constant supply of links coming in, so there's never kind of a lull in in that velocity happening for your client.
Cool. Okay, so this is a big question and there might not be like one answer for this, so it's just based on your experience, but how do you think people should be kind of setting themselves up for newsjacking, whether they work on their own or they work as part of a team, in-house or agency side? Is there kind of a way of making sure you're better or you're more able to do newsjacking and kind of be flexible and quick in your approach?
Yeah, I think you need to live and breathe the topic that you're trying to newsjack. So you need to live and breathe the verticals that your clients live in, your clients operate in. So they don't live there. So say, for example, you've got an interiors brand. You need to know what's going on in that industry. You need to know who the top designers are. You need to follow them on Instagram. You need to follow them on Twitter. You need to be aware of what's going on in that vertical. Because how else are you meant to understand what's topical? How else are you meant to understand what journalists are writing about? So having people within your team, hiring specifically to make sure that you've got people with different interests within your team. Because it'd be quite easy just to hire people that have the same interests, like they're all into a certain thing, they're all into football or they're all into fashion. Whereas realistically, you're not going to have clients that are always in one vertical. So hiring different types of people and setting your team up in a way that you cover all, as best you can, cover all those different areas, then you're golden, you're set up already, just by having people who are interested in things like that generally.
And what would you do, say if there was a gap of kind of interest in your team? Or I mean, I know it's hard to kind of cover all bases.
Yeah.
Is it something that can be kind of learnt too?
Absolutely. I think there's no need, say, for example, the royal family stuff I was speaking about before. I'm not into the royal family, but I made it so that I was interested in it enough to be able to spot that angle. So it wasn't a fact of me going out and reading everything that was written in Hello magazine about the royal family. It's I was setting up my tools to make sure that all that information was delivered to me. So I didn't have to do that. I was trying to make my life easier, I guess.
Yeah. So tools can fill that gap as well.
Yeah.
So not only do they help you when you've already got that interest, but they can also kind of help you find things or fill those gaps where you don't have those interests to begin with. If you've got all these alerts set up, and this is a question just for my understanding, do you not get inundated with alerts for all kinds of different, not just for, sectors, but detail of each sector? Are you just not inundated with alerts every day?
I've got filters set up on my inbox, so I have them going into certain labels on my Gmail account. So anything to do with property will go into one, anything to do with like lifestyle will go into another, and then even subcategories as well. So you can set up some really cool little filters on Gmail to make sure that you don't have it all like piling into your inbox and then you're missing emails from like important people. So just make sure you've got your filters set up, and then just make a point of checking those labels every day.
Okay.
Or whenever you get a minute.
And do you have like a specific time of day that you do that? Is that something you do first thing or last thing for the next day, or just whenever?
I just do it whenever. You never know when a story's going to come in. Like, for example, when the Arcadia story broke last night at about 8:30, I saw those news alerts coming in. So yeah, it's I say that you don't have to always be on, but it's always worth just keeping an eye out because you never know what's going to come in at any time, day or night.
Yeah. I mean, it just means you're not going to miss opportunities when they do
That's
come
it.
in. Yeah, which is, beneficial to you. So, kind of obviously over the last kind of 9-10 months that we've been, doing this kind of heavily, what's your kind of key takeaway from this, or the one thing that you'd like to kind of pass on to other people?
I think for me, it's a couple of things. I know I'm probably going against the rules here, but having the ability to think fast. So not just sitting on an idea and thinking, oh, I'll do that later. I'll do it tonight, or I'll do it tomorrow. Like, do it now. If you have the idea and you really, really believe it's going to work, do it now. Everything else can wait if you can't. But I think, the quicker you can do it, the quicker you can do something and get it out, the more successful it's going to be. I really do think that. But, and again, just looking at every single news story and thinking, how can I apply something that I'm already working on to that? Again, it's not traditional newsjacking. It's more, how can you spot opportunities where your client can be useful, or where your campaign can be useful? Because that's only going to help you with kind of results for any campaign. So yeah, I think for me, in terms of key takeaways, it's going to be think fast, and also just be like a sponge for information.
Yeah, and just soak everything up if possible. Brilliant. Okay, so let's see if we've got any questions. Oh, I like this one. So I got a comment from Lauren, and she says, how do you judge when it's too late to comment on a story?
Oh, that's a tricky one. I wouldn't say there's ever any too late. I think if you've had the idea and it doesn't take you long to turn it around, just do it and see what happens. There's nothing worse than not doing something and seeing somebody else do it.
Yeah.
If you had the idea, just do it, see what happens. Nothing's ever gonna come back and bite you on the bum, unless you obviously you kind of being insensitive to a topic. But I think the time, even if you think the time's passed, just try it and see what happens. You'd rather have the coverage than not have it at the end of the day.
And I think, I mean, from my perspective, if I've had a good idea and I'm committed to that idea, I'd actually like to see, how it performs as well. And you'll never know if you kind of just give up on that idea. So just go for it. Is that what you're saying?
I would say just go for it. I think even if you feel like you're too late, it might be that it gets used in a sub-story or another story that same journalist is writing, or because it's newsworthy and topical, they might be writing something around the subject. So even if you think you've passed that hour or you've passed that half an hour where you can truly call it newsjacking, just see what happens. If you can hook it to something that's already been written about, you might be lucky, you might not. But again, it is always best to be first past the post.
Definitely. Cool. Okay. So I've got a question from Eva here. She says, do you think there is value in fostering relationships so journalists come to you for a comment?
Oh, it's the ideal situation, isn't it, when they come to you for a comment? I definitely think there is a call for it. And if they know you for being able to provide them things in a quick and timely manner, if they've come to you and you turn something around for them, then absolutely. But equally, if it's a new subject that you're working on or a new vertical that you're working on, there's no need to have that relationship just yet. That's how you start building those relationships. So, it will pay dividends in the end.
Yeah, I mean, that was going to be one of my questions to you, actually, whether you had built relationships through doing kind of newsjacking pitches, even just offering a comment or a quote.
Absolutely. I think the lady from the Metro, Laura, she always comes to us for anything to do with gusto. If they want a recipe, like for example, when it was banana bread central earlier in the year, they came straight to us for a quote around that. And now she knows that obviously we can turn things around really quickly for her. So she knows we're a good option to have on her radar, really. So it does help, and it is a good thing to be known for being proactive and quick when someone asks for something.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point, actually, that, we tend to think that, what we're pitching has to be, this amazing story or really well thought out or this unique piece of data. But it can be as simple as sending over a recipe to somebody at the right time. That's all it has to be.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay, so, I got a question here from Sophie. She says, are there any downsides to newsjacking?
I think the only downside I can think of is that if you do get asked for a specific quote or a specific comment or even more data, like that's a good one when they come to you and say, well, have you got data around this? And you're not quite sure if you have or not, or you haven't quite thought of that angle, or it wasn't part of your overall campaign. So that can actually take up quite a significant portion of your day if you really want that coverage. So it's just, I guess that actually takes one to a separate point, which I'll cover in a minute. But I think in terms of downside, it can be kind of preparing extra things for comments and quotes, or even like preparing extra things to be able to newsjack that particular news story. And equally, if you have got a data-led campaign, which is something that we do quite a lot of here, you need to know that data inside out. Yeah. So that if a journalist does come to you and ask you for extra information, rather than you having to go and dig back through the data or dig back through your campaign, if you know off the top of your head, yes, I've got that stat ready, I'm not quite sure what it is, but I know I've got it, that's going to speed your like proactive and reactive kind of response tenfold. If you don't know where the data is, or you don't know if you've got that specific stat, you've then got to go and look for it. So it's worth knowing your campaign backwards.
Yeah, and that applies to any time that you're kind of outreaching.
100%.
That your methodology is watertight, and that, you can be able to kind of answer questions, especially if it's about data, especially at the moment as well.
Absolutely.
Cool. Okay, so a question from Lydia, and she says, what if you get a comment on a great site but don't get a link? Do you reply and ask them to link?
100%. Get them told. No, I'm joking. No, definitely link reclamation is a big part of it. If they've used your comment or your quote, you're well within your right to go back to them and say to them, in the nicest way possible, please, would you mind adding a link back to my client? We've worked quite hard to get this comment ready for you. I'd really appreciate it if you would add that in. You would do me a big favour, effectively. So in the nicest way possible, and that's how you foster that relationship as well. So there was a question before about building relationships. Just by asking the question and asking it nicely and explaining to them what value it will add. Specifically, if you're wanting to build a link to kind of a category page or kind of a more informational FAQ page, for example, you can explain to them what value that link is going to add to the comment they've just written. Because if they're using the comment, they might just want to use it as a comment, but because you want that link pointing back to your client's site, you need to sell them the reason why. So then you kind of go into link reclamation territory, and there's a whole separate webinar, I think.
And do you find, on the most part, that journalists will include a link?
Absolutely, yeah. If you ask for it up front, I think if you're sending your comment or quote over or anything that you want to newsjack, if you are to use this information, then please, would you mind including a link? I'd really appreciate it. And 9 times out of 10, I say 9 times out of 10 because not always, they'll do that for you, because they know that you're doing them a favour. They know that you've pulled all the stops out to be able for them to kind of get their story out with the most information possible. So, you can leverage that a little bit, especially with newsjacking.
Great. Okay. So a question from Holly. She says, do you ever newsjack content directly from a client's website and attribute this to the client, or do you refer back to a comment bank if you are not newsjacking a campaign?
It depends what it is. So, for example, to take Gusto as an example, using the recipes, what we might do is use a recipe and then add comments and tips to it. So we would have a bank of tips around certain recipes on the site, and then we just add that to the recipe and send that over as an entire piece. So rather than having like a comment bank, we just have a few tips ready that we could kind of quickly manipulate into being relevant to that recipe. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. So you just provide some additional information with it, so it's not just something, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay. So I've got a question from another Rebecca. Since it's such a quick turnaround needed, Do you just email the journalists that have covered the story already?
Yes, you could do that, but I'd also look at other people that might be interested in covering the story that perhaps haven't. So I'd include those on the media list, but I'd also include people that would potentially be interested in it as well. So say, for example, the example that I gave before about the Ministerial Mansions campaign and the Buckingham Palace, I looked at all the people that were talking about the royal family, effectively, who'd spoken about it in the last month, or perhaps 2 weeks, if you wanted to do like quite a small kind of targeted kind of push to press, I guess. Yeah, so definitely include the person that's already written about it, even if, because they might be planning a follow-up article, you just don't know, and it depends on what value you'd offer, extra value you'd be offering. They could write a whole new piece based on what you've sent them. So, for example, with the Ministerial Mansions campaign, the lady who I've initially pitched it to, the journalist at The Express, she'd already written about the royal family finances, but then she wrote about it again using the information that we've given to her. So it just goes to show that not necessarily you shouldn't pitch to people who've already written about it. You're pitching something completely different. You're not. Sorry, go on.
I guess if there's still momentum around a story and it's still being covered in the press, then it's in their interest to put more content out around that too.
If it's getting clicks, yeah.
What we were saying earlier about, whether it's too late, and just, if there is still momentum, just keep going with it, even if they've covered it.
You'll soon know when it's not relevant anymore.
Okay, so I've got a question from Amy. She says, how long do you outreach a reactive story for? So if it's not getting coverage, how long until you move on? That's a good question.
That's a really good question. I guess if it's just a reactive piece of content or a reactive pitch and it doesn't land straight away, obviously you want to do like your follow-up schedule that you would do normally. But I guess if it's not landing, just move on and do something else. I really would suggest that, because if it's not landing off the first kind of couple of contacts with the journalist, it must mean that it's run its course and you were either a little bit too late, or the pitch wasn't quite right, or it wasn't quite relevant enough. So it's a test and learn process, I think. And if you've got another idea in the bank, just see if you can rework the angle that you've not had much success with, just to see if you need to just like tweak it a little bit or make it a little bit more relevant, or effectively just keep trying until you get a hit.
Cool. Okay. I've got a question here from Sean, and he says, "What's an example of driving links to category pages that you have worked on?"
Oh, so for example, the Ministerial Mansions campaign, I know I keep talking about that one. I do have other examples, but that one, effectively, when we did the pitch, we were able to get links back into one of the category pages that the clients had defined, because I'd included it in the pitch as something that was, if you wanted to check out more information, then this is where you should go. So that was the link that they used when I asked them to put a link in. So, we had a bit of leverage there because we'd given them some additional information, additional stats, to be able to get the link that we wanted in there.
Great. Okay. And Laura asks, what is the best way to check the legitimacy of a news story? So I guess if all the major news outlets are covering it, then you can pretty much guarantee that it's legit. If it's on the BBC, for example, you can pretty much say that it is going to be okay to try and piggyback off the back of it. I guess anything that's like super clickbaity, you'd probably want to avoid. And I think you just kind of get to know. If it's not covered on the BBC, if it's not covered in a major news outlet, if it's just a story trending on Twitter, you do need to do your research and just make sure that it is legit. So say, for example, it's a Donald Trump story, I don't know. You just need to make sure that it's 100% like legit. Like, that's a really good point. Yeah, always do your due diligence before you do anything. Well, if he thinks it's legit, it's probably not. So I've got a question here from Sophie, and she says, if you know a certain publication has strict rules on not linking, do you tend to avoid outreaching to that publication?
Not necessarily. And the reason for that being is you might get the coverage and then it might get picked up somewhere else. So that's when your link reclamation will come into it. So I'd always rather have the coverage and for it to get picked up elsewhere. Because you never know, for example, that got picked up on the Express, the Ministerial Mansions campaign, but it didn't have a link in it. It still got picked up in other areas. So I could then go after that and try and reclaim those links from the other publications. So, I'd rather have the coverage than not have it, just for the sake of like having to ask them for a link, I guess. I'd always rather have to ask for a link than not have coverage, if that makes any sense.
No, it does, yes. So I've got a question for Amy here, which is maybe a question for both of us. And it's, how do you sell newsjacking reactive PR into your clients, e.g. X amount of newsjacking stories per year? So that's a good question. And we've kind of changed this recently. Like, we didn't really have a structure for this before, but now, because it's such a big part of what we do have a structure. And it's more that, you know, we will do it. We'll do newsjacking as part of kind of bigger hero campaigns anyway, but we also do what we call more kind of newsjacking and proactive pitching as part of our kind of agreements with clients, so they know they can expect kind of X amounts of stories being pitched kind of per month, whether that story is newsjacking or it might be kind of proactive and not linked to anything in particular. So we do have a structure for it, but that's kind of happened quite organically, born out of how kind of important newsjacking has been to us over the last kind of 10 months. And weirdly, it was something that we were testing out right at the beginning of the year. So Rebecca was doing some kind of test campaigns to see what we could do with it. And we realized that it was kind of a good strategy to have, to go alongside any kind of hero activity. So yeah, we do have a structure for it. And also you need a structure because you need to be able to get clients to sign off stories very quickly or sign off a quote or whatever it might be. So they need to know kind of what to expect from that relationship and kind of their part in that too. So I hope that answers that question. So I think that is everything. So Lydia has just put a request in for a link reclamation webinar. So I'm sure one of those will be coming along soon. So thank you, Rebecca, for providing all that insight and those tips. To go alongside this webinar, Rebecca's actually put a great blog post together. And it's called How to Newsjack with Your Digital PR Campaigns, plus 20 sources of inspiration. So if Andy's with us, he might drop it into the chat. If not, we'll tweet about it later on when we kind of release the video of the webinar. So look out for that. It's really useful. I didn't realize how much information Rebecca had on this, so it's a great resource. So check that out. So thank you again to Rebecca, and thank you to everybody who's joined us. Our next webinar is Data Fails with Thierry from Rise at 7. So that will be really interesting, and he's going to take us through kind of the mistakes we're all making with our data. So join us for that. That's on the 12th of January at 1 p.m. That's our next webinar. So thanks again for joining us. Thank you again to Rebecca, and we will see you all very soon.
Thank you very much.